This is the Nvidia RTX 5070. And this particular model is the TUF Gaming OC from Asus. Asus sent this card over for review. However, all thoughts and opinions are my own. Okay, so today we're taking a look at the RTX 5070, and honestly, this video will be completely different from my other 50 series reviews so far, and there's a few reasons for that. The 5070 is a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm late getting my review done. Everyone else has already done their reviews, and from what I can see, for the most part, it's generally a negative perception by most bigger tech YouTubers. And I think the reason why is because when you take the 5070 and if you compare it to the 4070 Super, there's not really that big of a performance uplift there. And then to top it all off, Jensen went on stage, introduced the 5070 by comparing it to a 4090. So naturally, everyone's going to take the 5070, compare it to the 4090 in native rendering, and see that the 5070 cannot match that, which we all knew that going into it because Jensen only meant that from the stance of using multi-frame generation. Now, multi-frame generation is an exclusive new technology only available on the 50 series cards, and I get it. Nvidia wants to promote that, but I don't think comparing a 5070 to a 4090 is the best way of doing that. We can talk about multi-frame generation and evaluate the pros and cons of it without ever having to talk about the RTX 4090. Anyway, look, with all that out the way, here's how I'm doing today's video. Number one, I was at Micro Center the other day, aka my home away from home, and there were people actively in line purchasing 5070s. And so naturally, I'm standing there wondering why people are buying the 5070, and I walked over to them and asked, and long story short, they're coming from older hardware. They're not coming from 4070s or 4070 Supers. They're coming from much older hardware. And this lines up exactly with what I see in my comment section here on YouTube all the time. I see people all the time saying that they're upgrading to a new card, usually the card that I just reviewed, and they're upgrading to that card from some really old card. And so I think in short, as tech reviewers, we get caught up in doing gen-on-gen performance reviews, but the reality is most gamers are not upgrading gen on gen. They're usually skipping a generation and then upgrading, and in some cases, they're even waiting longer than that. So while the 5070 does not look good when compared to something like the 4070 Super, it looks very awesome when compared to something like the 3070 and older. And so I actually have a 3070 Day One Founders Edition, and I figured, why don't I just compare it to that and do something different? And obviously, Nvidia is not the only player in town. AMD recently released their 9070 card, which is also another great alternative to the 5070. I've already published a full review on the 9070. It is a great card. I do highly recommend it, and I would also recommend checking out that video right after this one. I will have it linked down below for those who are interested. And now finally, with all that out the way, let me do my due diligence on the 5070 and let me tell you what you can expect from today's video. I'll do an unboxing of the card. I'll check for missing ROPs, and I will show you how you can easily check for that as well on your GPU. I'll cover the design and specifications of the TUF Gaming OC 5070. I'll cover some synthetic benchmarks and productivity workloads along with thermal testing. I will also briefly cover how you can overclock this card and tune it using GPU Tweak 3. And then we'll move into 1440p gaming benchmarks. We're going to talk about multi-frame generation as well. And then finally, I'll finish up with some final thoughts. And as always, chapters are below for your convenience. Okay, right now on the screen is all the hardware being used for today's testing benchmarks. So feel free to pause it and take a good look at it. I won't waste the time going over every individual component. The information is there for those who are interested. If you've been watching all of my 50 series reviews so far, it is worth noting there is a substantial change to my test bench from previous review videos, and that is the power supply unit. Asus sent me over their brand new ROG Strix 1200 watt Platinum power supply. There are two things that really make this power supply stand out. Number one is Asus's brand new patented technology, which is a voltage sensing technology that Asus is calling GPU first, and they claim it will enhance voltage delivery by up to 45%. And finally, this power supply unit also features a GaN MOSFET, which Asus claims will enhance power efficiency by up to 30%. And now let's talk about what you get in the box with the 5070. So obviously, you're going to get the TUF Gaming OC RTX 5070. In addition to that, you get one setup manual, you get a graphics card holder, you get a Velcro hook and loop, you get a TUF magnet, you get a certificate of reliability, you get a thank you card, and of course, you get a 1 to 2 adapter cable that will be used to power the GPU. Okay, and now let's check for missing ROPs. So according to Tech PowerUp, the RTX 5070 should have a total of 80 80 ROPS. We can easily check this by using an application called GPU-Z. Now you can download GPU-Z as a standalone app, or you can use Asus's free piece of software called GPU Tweak 3, which also includes GPU-Z. All you have to do is open GPU Tweak 3, then click the dedicated button for GPU-Z. And as you can see, my TUF Gaming OC RTX 5070 does have all 80 ROPS. And while we're here, you can also see that we are running Gen 5 by 16 on the PCIe. And now let's take a look at the design and specifications of this particular 5070, the TUF Gaming OC from Asus. As stated before, this is an overclocked model, so out of the box, it will clock higher than the default Nvidia clock speeds. I have all the speeds on the screen for your reference right now, and as you can see, the TUF Gaming OC does in fact clock higher, but I can promise you that this card will clock significantly higher than anything you're currently seeing on the screen. And while not the biggest card out there, this is fairly large for a 70 class card, coming in with a 3.1 slot design. And here are the official dimensions of the TUF Gaming OC RTX 5070. In terms of the I/O on the card, it features 2 HDMI 2.1B ports and 3 DisplayPort 2.1B ports, and the bracket around these ports is using 304 stainless steel. This card looks and feels like a premium quality card all the way around, but outside of that, you do still have that tried and true triple fan design. All 3 fans are Axial Tech fans. All 3 fans are using dual ball bearings. The 2 outer fans spin counterclockwise while the inner fan spins clockwise, and Asus claims this will help to reduce turbulence. All 3 fans will stop spinning when the GPU temperatures fall below 50°, and all 3 fans will start spinning again once the temperatures rise above 55°. Now, this card does offer minimal RGB lighting. It is concentrated to the right side of the GPU, and it is fully customizable in Armory Crate. The TUF Gaming logo will light up, and on this year's model, Asus added 4 additional light bars to give it a little bit of an extra pop. And as for the backplate is aluminum, and to the right side, you will see a fairly large vent for extra heat dissipation. Overall, Asus has set the bar very high in terms of thermal capabilities for this GPU, because not only are we talking about the backplate and the 3 fans, but Asus is also using a phase change GPU thermal pad here. And the idea behind that is that it should make better contact than something like traditional thermal paste, and therefore lead to better temperatures overall. In addition to that, Asus claims to have an exclusive manufacturing technique, which they refer to as max contact heat spreader. And the short version is that the overall temperatures can be up to 2°C lower. Now, while this is a 5070 and you're probably not too worried about melting adapters, it is still nice to know that this card features an LED light letting you know if you have not properly plugged in your power connector. And it shines bright red, so it's kind of hard to miss it. And something you'll find on all the TUF Gaming cards this generation is a dual BIOS. You will have a performance mode and a quiet mode. And yes, they perform exactly the way they are named. We will talk more about that coming up soon in the synthetic benchmarks. And I'm not gonna lie, this one sounded a little bit like marketing speak the first time I heard it, but actually it is a legitimate difference between the TUF Gaming series and the Prime series from Asus, and that is a protective PCB coating. So another little feather in the quality cap for those who appreciate those types of features. And one final design mention before we get into the actual testing, and that is the GPU guard and bracket that Asus has added on this GPU. GPUs are getting bigger and bigger and heavier, and the 40 series cards were known to have some cracks and breaks on the PCB and around the GPU die itself. And so this is the solution that Asus has come up with to hopefully mitigate that from happening. Okay, full transparency, I'm filming this a few days later. I have had massive allergies with the pollen count here in Georgia, record highs by the way, and I busted my lip, so I'm going to be looking a little bit different. So I apologize for that. Anyway, now let's move on and start talking about actual performance data. Starting off with Affinity Photo, I ran the built-in benchmark. The score we care about here is the raster score for single GPU. And as you can see, the 5070 is faster than the 3070 here. You have 26,632 versus 24,054. Now switching over to some thermal testing. While sitting idle on the desktop for 10 minutes, the RTX 5070 hit a maximum of 40.9°C on the GPU temperature, and in terms of the memory junction temperature, it maxed out at 52°C. That is something that will be worth comparing to if Nvidia ever decides to actually release their Founders Edition model, considering how the Founders Edition models tend to run hotter. Ignore the GPU hotspot temperature. Remember, Nvidia removed that this generation, so hardware info is defaulting to 255°C. And the max power draw while sitting idle on the desktop was only 32 watts. watts. As stated before, the RTX 5070 has a dual BIOS. While running a 10-minute stress test in FurMark, I saw a max GPU temperature of 61.6 C, a max GPU memory junction temperature at 62 C, the max power draw was 250 watts, and the max fan speed was just under 1200 RPM. While using the quiet mode and running a 10-minute stress test in FurMark, I saw a maximum GPU temperature of 66.2 C and a maximum GPU memory junction temperature of 70 C. The max power draw was 255 watts, and yes, that is 5 watts greater than the performance mode. However, there's no difference in power consumption between the two modes, and the maximum fan speed is 877 RPM. The operating behavior of the dual BIOS is working exactly as expected. The performance mode is colder while being louder, and the quiet mode is hotter while being quieter. And now let's switch over and start talking about overclocking. So all we have to do is open up GPU Tweak 3, and this will allow us to overclock the 5070. As a quick side note, you can actually perform undervolting as well in GPU Tweak 3. In my previous video with the 5090, I said I couldn't figure that out, but that's because the button is grayed out. I did give that feedback to Asus, and they are taking that into consideration, but we are here to talk about overclocking. So how far was I able to push the 5070? Well, for starters, we can increase the power limit by 20%, so that gives us a little bit more power to play with. And then for the GPU boost clock, I was able to completely max out the slider, and that gave me another plus 261 on the clock speed. And for the memory, I was able to add another plus 1200 to the clock speed. Okay, so what does that overclock actually do for us? Well, here's Call of Duty Black Ops 6 running at native 1440p on the extreme preset with no overclock, and the final average was 101 FPS with a 1% low of 74 FPS. And as you can see, our clock speed is above 2800 megahertz but below 2900 megahertz. Now if we switch over to the overclock, you can see our average FPS jumps up to 111 FPS, and our 1% lows jump up to 79 FPS. And by the way, are you noticing that clock speed? We're pushing over 3100 megahertz. So yeah, the 5070 is actually a pretty good overclocker, and it actually leads to additional gaming performance that you can notice. And now it's time for the best part of every GPU video, and that is the gaming benchmarks. I will be testing these games at 1440p. Now, while most of these games are ran at native 1440p, I did add in some ray tracing, DLSS, and multi-frame generation, just so we can include all of our bases, and I will be sharing some of my thoughts on multi-frame generation. Now, again, I am comparing the 5070 to the 3070, and I am doing that on purpose. Yes, it is true, the 5070 will not be that big of an uplift over the 4070 or 4070 Super, but I think it's equally true that people who have 4070s and 4070 Supers will not be going to a 5070. So using something that's older like a 3070, I think is completely fair here, but I will also talk about the 9070. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, first off, we have Assassin's Creed Mirage. I ran the in-game benchmark on the ultra high preset at native 1440p, and as you can see, the 5070 is definitely noticeably faster than the 3070. You have an average of 129 FPS compared to 82 FPS with a 1% low of 97 FPS versus 62 FPS. I also want to point out here that the 3070 only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and you can see that Assassin's Creed Mirage at 1440p on the ultra high preset is actually maxing it out. Meanwhile, the 5070 has room to spare because it has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Next up is Call of Duty Black Ops 6 on the extreme preset at native 1440p. Once again, I ran the in-game built-in benchmark, and as you can see, the 5070 has an average of 101 FPS with 74 FPS on the 1% lows. Meanwhile, the 3070 has an average of 70 FPS with a 1% low of 52 FPS. Unfortunately, even at 1440p, both cards do seem to be getting very close to their max VRAM. However, the 5070 is faster, and it does give a little bit more room there on the VRAM limit. Next up is Far Cry 6, native 1440p on the Ultra preset. Again, I ran the in-game built-in benchmark, and as you can see, the 5070 is faster, but the 3070 is still performing very well with an average of 106 FPS with a minimum of 96 FPS, and the 5070 has an average of 167 FPS with a minimum of 151 FPS. And in terms of VRAM, neither one of the cards are getting close to their limits, so Far Cry 6 is not pushing these cards as much as other titles, and so you could use either one of these cards and have a great experience. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077. I ran the in-game built-in benchmark, native 1440p on the Ultra preset preset. And as you can see, the 5070 is definitely faster here. You're talking an average of 105 FPS versus 63 FPS on the 3070 and 88 FPS for the minimum versus 53 FPS for the minimum on the 3070. And here we see the 3070 getting very close to the max VRAM limit. Meanwhile, the 5070 has plenty of room to spare. Okay, now switching over to ray tracing. This is the ultra ray tracing preset at 1440p. Neither one of these cards is a good experience. I wouldn't call either one of these playable by any means at all. But as you can see, the 5070 is almost double, not quite double, but almost double the performance of the 3070 when it comes to ray tracing. And of course, ray tracing does push the VRAM limit even further for both cards. But again, I would not call this playable. So while the 5070 is definitely winning here and it is an improvement, it's not something I would recommend. And that's where all the bells and whistles come in. So for the 3070, I set it to DLSS quality because I'm a big believer in trying to preserve image quality. But technically, you could use performance and get a little bit more performance here. I also turned on ray reconstruction and I am using the transformer model. And on the 5070, we have as much of a like-for-like comparison as possible. DLSS quality, ray reconstruction, transformer model, and I enabled multi-frame generation on the 4X mode. And as you can see, it's not even a competition here. The 5070 is absolutely mopping the floor with the 3070, and it's mostly thanks to that multi-frame generation. The 3070 does not even have access to normal frame generation from the Nvidia family. You can technically enable frame generation from AMD on the 3070, but then you lose access to ray reconstruction and the transformer model. Anyway, with multi-frame generation, it tells you that you average 213 FPS. We all know that is not a real 213 FPS, but it is still a much better gaming experience when compared to something like the 3070 at a native 40 FPS. Okay, and for the final benchmark, I just have Hogwarts Legacy here with the 5070. I'm using DLSS quality, multi-frame generation on the X4 mode, ultra ray tracing and ultra settings. And as you can see, we're over 300 FPS while in Hogsmeade, which is by far one of the most demanding areas in this game. And just speaking here subjectively, yes, frame generation definitely adds latency, and that is something that you can measure. However, in a single player story driven game like Hogwarts Legacy, I personally do not notice it. I cannot personally tell the difference between 20 and 25 milliseconds or 30 and 35 milliseconds. I just can't. Now, to be completely honest here, I do not have any latency metrics on screen for us to look at right now. I just wanted to demonstrate the technology, show a game where you can actually use it, and then tell you subjectively what my experience was like with it. And overall, it was a very positive experience. However, if you pay close attention to the on-screen display, you can see a little bit of flickering and shimmering. Sometimes the multi-frame generation does interact with the on-screen display and cause a little bit of artifacting. But for the most part, if you look at the actual gameplay, when I'm running around, there's nothing too terribly obvious that jumps out and catches my eye or anything like that. Overall, I would call this a very good experience. I definitely plan on playing around more with multi-frame generation and doing a deep dive video on it in the future, so get subscribed for that. Now, just real quick, I want to give an honest comparison here, and if you are coming from older hardware like a 3070, then yes, you can get the 5070 and get an upgrade, but you can also get something like the 9070. Again, I've already reviewed this on the channel, and Asus also offers a TUF Gaming OC model for the AMD side of things in case you're interested in sticking with the TUF Gaming lineup. With that being said, you can clearly see that the 9070 is a faster card than the 5070, at least at native rendering. In Call of Duty here, you have an average of 92 FPS versus 70 FPS at 4K. Also, the 9070 has 4 more gigs of VRAM coming in at 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So that is something to be mindful of. It is something to consider if you're in the market. And now it's time for my final thoughts on everything. So we have the 5070, and then of course we have the TUF Gaming aspect of it. If you've seen any of my other GPU reviews up to this point, you should know what I'm going to say. In terms of TUF Gaming, I can recommend TUF Gaming as a product line. If you go and get a 5070, 5070 Ti, 5080, it doesn't matter. Asus does a great job with the TUF Gaming family of products. They are well built. I think they look great. And if you get the OC models, as you saw in today's video, they overclock very well. So they are really good performers. Now, that's the TUF Gaming side of things. But what about the 5070 side of things? Well, it's no secret. The 5070 is not some gigantic leap forward. It's not some, hey, hey, go out and buy this card right now. It's not like that at all. I didn't want to make another review that everyone else had already made. That is why I decided to compare my 5070 to my 3070, because it was a different approach. And honestly, it's an approach that, while sure, you can make the argument, I kind of went out of my way to make the 5070 look better. But at the same time, it's more realistic because, like I said before, the average gamer is not coming from last gen hardware. The average gamer is coming from much older hardware. So for that person, a 5070 would be more of an upgrade than for somebody who's coming from a 4070 or 4070 Super. And I felt like comparing the 5070 to the 3070 did a better job showcasing that. But also, like I just said here at the end of the video, if you're coming from a 3070 or any other card, sure, you can get the 5070, but you can also get the 9070. And that's where you open up the can of worms. Do you want Nvidia? Do you want AMD? Do you want DLSS? Do you want FSR? Do you want more VRAM, or do you want multi-frame generation? Because that is exclusive currently only to the 50 series cards. So you have options, and I would argue that AMD and Nvidia are closer than they've ever been before, but Nvidia still has that mind share. And honestly, for all of those reasons, I think the 5070 will probably sell better than what most of us think that it will. Now, it does have an uphill battle. You do have the whole pricing situation going on, and it still only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And while technically 12 gigabytes of VRAM is enough, it's right there on the border in 2025. You saw in some of my benchmarks, we were getting very, very close to the 12 gigabyte limit. However, I've made my claims about 8 gigabytes not being enough in the past, and then I received a ton of comments and a ton of feedback telling me that people are okay with just simply turning down settings and getting some of that VRAM back. So perhaps 12 gigabytes will be more than enough for a while longer, maybe longer than what I'm thinking. You let me know in the comment section below. And now finally, with all that being said, let's quickly talk about pricing. Honestly, I don't really know what to tell you on pricing. The market right now is incredibly volatile. I wake up every day, I feel like there are new tariffs being thrown at everything. Everything right now is incredibly expensive. At the time of this filming, Nintendo just delayed their pre-orders on the Nintendo Switch 2 because of brand new tariffs. That's how bad it's getting. So we can evaluate a product on X price and literally tomorrow it be Y. Now, with that being said, I'm not trying to cop out, so let's talk about it. Nvidia said that the 5070 should be $550, but they also said the 5090 would be $2,000. When's the last time you've seen a 5090 sell for $2,000? They also said the 5080s should be $1,000, yet 5080s go all the time for well over $1,000. I feel like most of the 50 series cards have shifted in terms of their pricing. 5070s will mostly probably sell for right around or just under what a 5070 Ti is supposed to be for the MSRP. But like I said, everything has pretty much shifted up a tier. And of course, in every tier, you're going to find a couple of models here and there that you can maybe scrape by with the MSRP. But I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of these models that I've seen floating around at the MSRP, they are bottom of the barrel models. One thing I can say is that I know it's more expensive and it's more money than what anybody wants to pay. I get it. But what I can say is that if you do opt to pay the extra money and go and get something like a TUF Gaming OC model, you're getting a good quality card. I can definitely tell you that. Unfortunately, like I said, things right now are pretty rough, very volatile, and I'm holding on for dear life and hoping things get better because I want to get excited to talk about tech again, especially GPUs. And right now, it's very, very hard to do that for a multitude of reasons. Anyway, that's my video on the 5070. If you liked it, please do me a favor, hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new, get subscribed. And until next time, E-Rock out.